Okay, welcome back to another episode of BJCP Beer Reviews with Leo. Today we're going to be talking about specialty type beer evaluation, which I've broken into three parts. First, an introduction, what it is. Second, how you should be entering these specialty type beers in competitions. And finally, how, as a judge, these beers should be judged. And I think this will be very useful for the homebrewers and also for the people training to become BJCPs, uh, judges, and yeah, honestly it's a bit more confusing than I first realized. So I wanted to have a whole separate video on this, and this should be a good supplement to both or some of the future beer reviews as well as two that I've already done. One on fruit beer, which I made some mistakes because I hadn't really learned all this, and two, spice beer, which I had just uploaded today. Okay, so first the introduction then. What is specialty type beer? So specialty type beer is a broad term and it's used to refer to styles described in categories 28 through 34 of the BJCP guidelines, and these include wild ales, fruit beers, spiced beers, anything that uses alternative fermentables, smoked beers, wood or wood aged beers, as well as other specialty type beers. So these are distinguished and contrasted with the classical styles, which are categories 1 to 27, um, because those can be fully described from the guidelines. And in contrast, specialty type beers have unique characters, um, and that build upon typically base styles or classic styles, but they can have significant variance or variation between, like, say, two spiced beers. They may have very different alcohol by volumes or IBUs or whatever. Um, and so they're not really, they don't fit into a style specifically very well. Now, specialty type beers, yeah, I guess that's all I really wanted to say there. Okay, so next I wanted to talk about how to enter these beers and give you some warnings that could really hurt you in terms of being judged. So first is obviously to check the entry instructions carefully for a given style. Usually you're required to declare the additional information um, that's required, which may include something like the base style, and you should also know if it needs to be classic or not. So if it were classic, then you would need to say this is a spiced beer that has a base style of an American stout. But if it doesn't need to be a classic style, then you could just say this is a spiced beer that was a stout. So that's like a stout is not a classic style because it's just too broad. It doesn't have these specific um, characterization from the guidelines. It's a more general description. Okay, second, anything that you specify or declare in your entry instructions should be evident because you will be docked if the judges can't discern these flavors. And this is fair because when you specify that something is there, you're signaling to the judge that you want them to judge your use of it. Um, so say you add an ingredient but you don't taste it, that's fine. Just don't mention it specifically because if you can't taste it, neither can the judge probably. Um, when you're using a blend of ingredients, it's not typically advised to list out every specific ingredient. This is especially true for like spiced beers. I think it's most relevant. Uh, but you can say that you're using a blend, like mulled spices, for example. And that way, if the judge tastes, a medley of things, they could be like, "Oh yeah, that's there." But oh, I didn't get cloves specifically. Um, that's sort of how you want to think about that carefully. Um, Finally, two more things that one is if a beer is designed to showcase just the one ingredient, it's perfectly okay for the base style to be relatively neutral. You don't have to go all out and then also go all out on a specialty ingredient. And then lastly, you want to be aware of what ingredients trump others in terms of style entry. So, for example, a spiced wild ale should actually be entered as a wild ale, and it would fall under 28C, specialty wild ale, because the wild fermentation takes style preference for the entry. Okay, so that's all the high level stuff that you really need to know as a brewer entering beer in competition or as a judge. And if you're not interested in additional details, you can stop the video right now. Thanks for watching. But uh, I did want to go into a little bit more detail for those who are more interested. So um, yeah, so again, additional information that you have to give, you really need to make sure that you've closely examined the entry instructions. Um, you should try and put yourself in the position of the judge. So write down only the useful information needed to properly judge the beer. Um, and so, for example, you could say, like in a fruit beer, you might say the variety of fruit, jazz apples, or you might want to just use a more basic descriptor, tart apple, sweet cherry. Um, and then when specifying a base beer style, you also want to read the entry instructions for that style carefully because um, some may say that a classical style is required, and this means that the beer should be listed as one of the styles in the guidelines. Um, let's see what else. Yeah, so another thing that I wanted to go through is the specific precedents. This was somewhat arbitrarily defined by the BJCP, but the ingredient choice sets the beer style, and the following precedence is used when you have multiple specialty ingredients. So wild ales have the highest precedence. Next would be smoke, then would be wood, and then fruits and spices, and lastly would be the sugars, specialty sugars and alternative fermentables. And again, this is only if you can perceive both of these multiple specialty ingredients in the final beer. So maybe you made a wild ale with fruit, but the fruit didn't really come through, it all fermented out. You would just maybe not want to be like, oh yeah, this is a specialty wild ale because maybe it's just a wild ale if the fruit didn't really come through. Um, okay, now I wanted to talk a little bit about judging the beers. So this is what the BJCP mentions in terms of the effects of added ingredients on balance in beer. Balance is plays into the overall impression in the BJCP score sheet, um, and really the key to any good specialty type beer is that the ingredient character is pleasant and supportive. It shouldn't be artificial or inappropriately overpowering, and they always say that it should be in balance and harmony with the base style. Um, let's see what else. Okay, yeah, so for specifically though, I guess aroma hops, yeast byproducts, malt components of the underlying beer. These are all maybe less noticeable um, characteristics of the base beer when you've added these additional ingredients. Especially hops, these may be intentionally subdued to further accentuate the specialty ingredient and make sure that it does come through in the final beer. Um, Sometimes you do want to make sure that there is a malt aroma, especially in like dark styles, but hop aromas can be almost completely absent. So if you imagine like a fruit beer might be entered as like a fruit beer with a base style of a blonde ale. Now like an American blonde would have significant hop characteristic, but if it was just a blonde ale, then maybe you wouldn't really expect to pick up on the hops necessarily. Um, And I think I did say most of this, but just to really reiterate and drive home the point for judging, balance is the key to a successful specialty type beer. The entry should be a harmonious marriage of the base beer and the specialty ingredients, with neither overpowering the other. These should try and ideally complement and enhance the underlying beer, and at the end of the day, it should be pleasant to drink. So um, but that said, the entry should be recognized as belonging in the entry category, uh, and at least not clearly belong somewhere else. Um, They say also that the judges shouldn't be like overly pedantic about seeking the full character of a specified base style. So again, even if you have to declare a classic base style, if you're judging the beer, don't be so harsh on those aspects. So this is something I'm going to try and internalize as a future beer judge. Um, and then lastly, I guess they mentioned that the specialty type beers are sort of one of the more creative aspects of brewing. Um, and the creative element exists in these styles, and it should be recognized and appreciated when it's well done. So, something unusual and delicious should generally be rewarded. And then, as a judge, just try and keep an open mind and don't be as rigid as you would be with classical styles. Okay, so that's all, and hopefully this helps your understanding of how these beers should be judged and, you know, even just take it into your regular beer drinking days. Um, enjoy the beer for what it is, but don't be a stickler on the base style. All right, hope you enjoyed watching. Thanks, guys.